Yo, what is good, everybody? It's your boy Golden Falls, Golden What If, whatever you want to call me, and I'm back. I am back. I wanted to preference this really quick. This is the finale. So everything we got to go through, I'm going through the rest of this video. I want to get the series done for y'all, so I wanted to finish it up. So I don't know how long this video is gonna be. I might skip over some things just because, I mean, there's not much that will either change or the fact that Izuku is too strong for it. Not sure yet. But nonetheless, I hope y'all enjoy. But also, I am on my old setup. I wanted to preface that really quick. I should be getting my new, or my I guess technically new setup. But I had my new setup and something happened and it was some faulty equipment. So I'm going to be getting that back pretty soon. But nonetheless, we are here for the finale of What If Deku was a Quirkless Prodigy. And with that said, let's just get right into the finale of the What If. Let's get it. Izuku would begin traveling through the forest with his classmates. They're able to obliterate monster after monster, and Izuku especially doesn't have much trouble by any means. Well, being around 60 to 65% of One For All at this point, and having that extreme amount of strength and also technique, Izuku just buries and bullies his way through every single monster in that forest, and eventually their class would arrive, even on time this time. When they arrive, Aizawa is waiting and tells them that they did a pretty good job. Of course, saying that, well, you know, they're gonna have lunch, they're gonna have this day kind of to rest and get settled in, and then they will finally begin their true training. During this time, Izuku would spot out a little boy or a little kid, and he'd walk over to introduce himself. The little boy by the name of Koda immediately goes to punch Izuku, well, in the family jewels, but Izuku is able to grab his hand before he's even able to do it because of danger sense. Izuku shakes his head and says that he really shouldn't try to low blow people he doesn't know. Of course, some of the Wild Pussycats would try to basically apologize, people like Mandalay and everybody. But Izuku said it would be fine, and he doesn't really mind. It's just kind of what happens. A little kid that isn't, well, in the right frame of mind, or maybe doesn't enjoy the presence of the hero students. Izuku can already tell that the boy doesn't really like, well, hero students, doesn't like heroes. He's not sure why, but maybe he'll figure that out later. After the day was practically over, they have a nice dinner, you know, go to take their little bath and all that stuff. They head to bed and then wake up the next morning. The next morning, Izuku and everybody else would be told exactly what their training would be. Each and every person has their own agenda, and Izuku would eventually get his. His is just to basically increase the output of not only One For All, but actually figure out any other powers that he can possibly take grip hold of. Of course, Aizawa does not say this around anybody else, but Izuku knows exactly what to do. He begins to actually spar with Tiger, but frankly the spars become very lopsided because Izuku is just outclassing him not only in martial arts, but frankly in just raw power. Izuku could just throw simple punches and probably would outpace him just by raw speed and power alone. Izuku being able to just flip Tiger on his head more or less as quick as possible proves that Izuku is leaps and bounds over the Wild Pussycats, at least in terms of basically fighting ability. Izuku would continue training, sometimes with various people, being that of Todoroki, sometimes Bakugo, and some other people that are there, even some people of Class 1B. But of course, nobody can exactly keep up with Izuku, but being able to basically increase One For All to a higher state is definitely his goal. He does this the entire day, and he slowly but surely begins to build up. His goal is basically just to use a really high amount of One For All without hurting his body, because of course he could ramp it up to 90%, but if that would actually hurt his body quite a bit. It won't like break his bones by any means, but he'll have this like really sore feeling in his entirety of his body, like it's struggling to maintain. And of course Izuku doesn't want that. He wants to be relaxed in that form and be able to fight freely and openly. And during this time, Izuku would pick up on a good amount of basically techniques and different ways to control One For All to the best of his ability, trying to work with Black Whip, Danger Sense if he possibly could, and some other things that he begins to learn quickly. Actually, he does learn of something. He began to believe that he was just jumping really high and he was allowing himself to float up there, but he actually figures out that he has another quirk that practically allows him to fly, or at least sort of. It's called float. Float being able to basically allow him to guide or glide through the air when he just jumps off a surface, basically gives him that imitation of flight. And as long as he's jumping from side to side or jumping over and over and even turning off float and then turning it back on, he can kind of regulate his flight to a certain extent. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's definitely something he'll use for mobility purposes. After some more time and after about another day, Izuku would be just hanging out with everybody and having dinner. Of course, they decide that they're going to have a day off because, well, they've been training like all heck. Of course, they've been training just day in, day out as much as possible, so they're actually taking a bit of a break and they're going to be doing their little test of courage. During this time though, Izuku is basically eating food and decides that he's going to bring food to Koda, seeing that Koda actually went up to a nearby mountain. He heads over there and he brings Koda food, but Koda really does not want to talk to Izuku. Izuku was told at one point though that Koda doesn't really like heroes. Of course, he doesn't know why, but Mandalay would tell him that, well, his parents died because they were in the line of fire as heroes. Izuku would eventually comfort Koda, telling him that, for one, it's not his fault, and for two, he can't really do much about it. But Izuku begins to speak with him about everything, about heroes, about who he wants to be. Obviously, Izuku has gone through a lot, worked extremely hard, and for a while, he thought he was going to be quirkless, that he had to push through everything quirkless. But now he got blessed with a quirk, and he explains that it arrived out of nowhere. Of course, he can't tell Koda the exact truth, but this will definitely make Koda feel a lot better. But just as he's saying these things, a voice comes from the forest, a raspy one, and definitely a terrifying one. A man by the name of Muscular begins to walk up, saying that, well, they should run away as fast as possible or they'll die, because obviously he's looking for someone by the name of Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku looks at him and basically tilts his head a little bit. Why are you looking for Bakugo? Explain. Muscular says that they're not only looking for Bakugo, they're actually looking for this kid called Izuku Midoriya, and frankly he looks a lot like him. Oh, so you want both of us? Interesting. Well, I'm gonna have to tell you, you're not getting out of here. At least, not conscious. Izuku in an instant is in front of Muscular, not even giving him a second to even breathe. Izuku grabbing him by the arm, flicking him, basically flipping him on his back. Izuku kicks him right in the face and then pins one of his arms beneath basically his other arm. Izuku then begins to yank, getting Muscular in a semi chokehold from the top, from basically behind Muscular because he flipped him on top, and Izuku begins to yank harder and harder. Muscular tries to get out but can feel that Izuku is like a gorilla. He is not letting go. Izuku is just that powerful at this point. Izuku then punches him right in the face again and then kicks him in the face, eventually knocking out Muscular extremely fast. He has no time to waste. He assumes that if there's one villain here, that there are many more, and just as he thinks this, fire begins to erupt throughout the forest. Izuku begins dashing around, eventually dropping off Koda, but smashing into villain after villain he sees, basically saving the mass majority of his classmates from either Nomus or just villains in general, and Izuku would eventually be heading over toward Bakugo. But just as he's heading over, he jumps through this odd looking portal. He doesn't mean to, but it appeared right in front of him, and when he basically appears on the other side, he's hit with some sort of marble. Izuku is beginning to panic and realizes that he's trapped. He realized that Danger Sense didn't react quick enough, and frankly he didn't react quick enough, because even if Danger Sense did, there is no getting himself out of that situation, especially when he was flying or just traveling as fast as he was. Nonetheless, he would wake up chained down to an area, or at least basically handcuffed to an area, and he looks to his left to see Bakugo. Immediately, he begins to think that, well, the villains must have gotten both of them, but frankly, this isn't that bad of a situation. Theoretically, and hopefully, none of them probably will be able to keep up with Bakugo and Izuku at the same time, and their little handcuff strategy might basically screw them up. And that is exactly what it did. Izuku, Bakugo were sitting there waiting for them to enter, and when they do, they begin to think that maybe it's for the best to let go of Bakugo. Obviously, they have Izuku because they want to know more about his power. It's so interesting. So similar to, well, quirks All For One has seen in the past users of One For All. Bakugo begins to hear this, and he's shocked to hear it, but then realizes that it all makes sense. Izuku lied. Of course he did. I mean, but would he have told anybody the truth? Why would he? He begins to look at Izuku thinking that maybe he's betrayed. And that's what the villains try to basically portray, that Izuku lied, that Izuku was basically falsely giving all of these basically interactions that weren't true, and that he's actually the successor of All Might himself. But Bakugo, after hearing this, begins to smirk. You really think that I care at all? You all are really, really, really dumb. Bakugo blasts off his cuffs, and he tells Izuku if he's really the successor of All Might, then they should have no trouble getting out of this situation. Izuku smiles and cracks his knuckles and then cracks his neck, saying that he agrees. Wholeheartedly he agrees. They begin to just straight up piece every single villain in the room with them, basically knocking out the mass majority of them and capturing all of them in one area, tying them up, and eventually the wall next to them would be broken through by the heroes. Izuku and Bakugo would look at the heroes and say that they're a little late, throwing the villains to them, but just as they throw them in midair, a portal grabs those villains and sends them off. Izuku and Bakugo would be teleported away as well, getting covered by this red goo, or this black goo. But when Izuku appears, he appears in the hand of someone with this black face mask by the name of All For One. Izuku struggles to get out of the grip, but immediately he just slams his arm into basically All For One's elbow, getting free as he hurt his elbow pretty bad. He is able to back off slightly, and he activates One For All as high as he possibly can, being that of about 80% without being extremely hurting right now. Of course, he kind of exerted himself when he was in that small room when he was fighting with Bakugo, but 80 to 90% he should be able to crank it up if need be. He sits there at 80% of One For All and stares at All For One. All For One begins his fight with Izuku, but I'm gonna be honest, this fight is something that All For One was not prepared for. He wasn't prepared for the successor of One For All to have a grip on so many quirks, and on top of that, be able to use One For All, the real power version of One For All, to the limit that he currently is. All For One gets hit in the mask, the stomach, and every vital point Izuku can even think of, he's pulling out all the stops. Technique-wise, Izuku is flawless. He is not pure power. Izuku begins to use his legs, his arms, anything you could think, his elbows, any martial arts he's ever learned. He begins to exploit every weakness and every ability All For One is showing. All For One tries to find an opening, and just as he thinks he does, Izuku dodges the tendrils that get sent at him without even looking. Izuku obviously has danger sense. He has a connection with the other basic successors before they even know, or the people in the past. And All For One feels that he's losing extremely quick. He wants to pull out his last stop, pulling out every quirk he possibly can. All For One loads it up into one arm. Just as he does this though, he immediately gets smashed in the back of the head by All Might himself. All Might lands a critical blow as Izuku does the same to All For One's face, and it's as if All For One himself was not a match for this duo. All For One out cold, and the other villains, the League of Villains, weren't even able to escape. Izuku wraps them up in Black Whip, and they all are captured. Of course, this is being televised, and Izuku would get in some minor trouble for fighting. But in a way, he was fighting out of self-defense. He couldn't just, well, leave. That wasn't a thing, or at least that's what the people and the police force begin to say. And they begin to say that the only punishment he'll be getting is to basically take a couple classes to learn that he shouldn't have done something like that. But on top of that, everybody in the outroar of the entirety of Japan believes that this young man should have a hero license. So they come to some agreement. As long as he goes through a couple classes of basically trying to stay out of trouble, quote unquote, which he basically won't even be doing those classes, he'll be gifted the provisional hero license, or a provisional hero license. Izuku, hearing this, is excited, and everybody in Japan is happy to hear this, but everybody now knows that Izuku is the successor to All Might. Pressure is one thing, but this is beyond just pressure. But Izuku has thrived off of this. He's always known that he was talented in terms of just working and work ethic. He's shown that throughout this time. And Aizawa himself put a bunch of pressure on Izuku, telling him that he has a chance at UA. And then pressure and more pressure he's been putting on himself. He's been doing it all his life. So this won't be any more pressure. So while the rest of his class is working on getting their provisional hero licensing exam after moving into dorms and all of that, Izuku would be actually training, working, and actually taking those, those classes, of course. But he would mostly be training with the big three. Aizawa began to believe that Izuku's strength actually probably rivaled them, maybe even stronger. He began sparring with people like Mirio, Nejire, and actually becoming a lot closer to the big three than most of his other classmates. After a couple days, eventually his classmates would arrive back, and Izuku would be told that they'll be starting up basically hero work studies. Of course, Izuku would wonder where he should go, but Mirio says that Sir Night-Eye has a place for him if he wants to basically come out. And of course, Izuku is completely fine with that. Sir Night-Eye is one of the best heroes he's ever seen, and he would love to do that. And the connection he has with the big three, the relationship, and basically how well they work together with Mirio, with Nejire, and of course Nejire is not in Night-Eye's group, but at the same time they still have a good connection in terms of, well, fighting and also just working together now after basically knowing each other for a lot longer than obviously in canon, but also working together over the next, or that week or so when they were out getting their provisional hero licensing or licenses. Nonetheless, this would lead Izuku to going to Sir Night-Eye's. Of course, he's already done the whole sparring with Mirio and stuff. I mean, frankly, he wouldn't do that again with his class. It wouldn't be fair. Izuku was going head to head with Mirio, arguably actually outclassing Mirio to a certain extent. And frankly, just pure martial arts, he would do that. Eventually, Izuku would head over to Sir Night-Eye, and Sir Night-Eye would decide to give him a bit of a test. That test would be to basically take this little stamp away from him. But Izuku would be able to do it with relative ease. Sir Night-Eye begins to be extremely shocked. He knew he was strong, but this strong is something different. He realizes that every future he was seeing, everything that he was seeing in front of Izuku, basically Izuku, what he was going to do, it all ended with Izuku grabbing the stamp, but how fast he was able to do it was insane. It was as if the speed itself was transcending time, as if his power is developing at such a rapid rate that nobody's even going to be able to keep up eventually. Izuku stamps his own paper and smiles and thanks Sir Night-Eye for the opportunity. Night-Eye nods and says that, well, they should just get right to work, immediately assigning Mirio and Izuku to their first patrol. During this first patrol, well, it seemed pretty simple. Everything seemed to be going relatively well, and Izuku just was taking it kind of easy. It didn't seem too crazy. He was just making sure that he kept an eye out for anything and anyone. But out of nowhere, out of a small alleyway, a little girl came running out and even crashed into Izuku. Luckily, Izuku was able to grab her and not let her hit the ground, and he asks if the little girl is okay. The girl is shaking with bandages all over him, and he wonders what's going on. But just as he begins to think this, Danger Sense begins to flare off like crazy as a masked figure begins to walk out of the alleyway as well, saying that he apologizes for his daughter's inconvenience and that she really shouldn't be, messing with the heroes. Izuku's danger sense begins to pierce through his head as if it's screaming at him to get the little girl out of there. Izuku looks up at Mirio, and Mirio begins to try and de-escalate the situation, knowing who this person is, but Izuku has none of it. Immediately, Izuku grabs the little girl, giving her to Mirio, and sends Black Whip right at Overhaul, grabbing him and tightly gripping him so that he cannot move any part of his body. Izuku basically begins to cocoon Overhaul with Black Whip, holding him there as long as possible, and he tells Mirio to get her to safety right now. Mirio is shocked, but obviously just follows the order that Izuku just gave, dashing away and getting out of there. Izuku begins to scream to everybody around, saying to go the opposite direction and to leave at this moment. Everybody tries to stay calm, but they all begin to run the opposite direction to clear out the area for basically who they know as the successor of All Might. Immediately, Overhaul struggles and tries to get out, and even tries to touch Black Whip, but for some reason, nothing occurs. It's as if he can't even basically use his quirk on it. But at the same time, Izuku refuses to let his hands or anything touch any ground or anything at all, forcing him into the air and holding him there. Yes, this is extremely difficult for Izuku to maintain, and frankly, he might have a good grasp on Black Whip, but holding someone as strong as Overhaul exactly where he is, not the easiest thing to do. Just as he's holding him midair though, he begins to sense something. Well, of course, Danger Sense immediately triggers onto multiple people storming in. But just as these multiple people are storming in to basically help Overhaul, immediately Mirio is back and slams them to the ground as if they begin to pick off each one by one. Mirio says that there's more reinforcements coming and that they need to handle what's in front of them. Izuku asks if there's basically core canceling cuffs, they need them right now, or he'll have to knock out Overhaul and then use the cuffs, but he wants to make sure that they're there. Of course, they're fending off multiple people at once, and Mirio is basically taking that forefront, making sure to give Izuku just the time to hold Overhaul still. If he's as dangerous as they say, they don't want to let go of him. Holding him still is difficult, but Izuku is able to do so until those cuffs come. Of course, the other villains begin to try and swarm, trying to help Overhaul one after another, but of course, the heroes begin to storm in as well. Multiple reinforcements. We're talking from UA, but also from the agency of Night Eye. Of course, everybody is now arrived, and luckily Overhaul would be stopped right here and right now. Overhaul knew exactly who Izuku was, but maybe knew a little too late. He realized that Izuku was the same person he saw in the news fighting All For One, and of course he tries to escape. He's trying to escape this Black Whip, but he can't. Izuku's power is too great for this villain, and frankly, he's basically knew exactly what to do immediately. This Izuku has been working way too hard and has seen way too many things to allow this little girl to just leave, especially when and how much she's been hurt. Izuku knows his capabilities, and he knows All Might's philosophy. Especially when you're able to help somebody, you never turn your back on them. Izuku is able to subdue Overhaul by knocking him out and then cuffing him, and luckily they're able to get Overhaul and the Shiha Hazaikai over the next couple of days off the street. Everybody commends Izuku, but Izuku says he didn't do much. Frankly, he most likely took the worst course of action. Frankly, if he didn't hold Overhaul still, and let's say he didn't have the power to do so, well, they could have put everybody else in danger far quicker than actually helping anybody. But of course, Mirio says to cut him some slack. Of course, Izuku did the right thing. They saved the little girl, and that is all that matters, and everybody is safe and sound. Izuku nods and smiles as Night Eye commends him as well. And eventually this whole case with the Shiha Hazaikai is wrapped up in a matter of days. Izuku would continue with his work study. Obviously, everybody else would as well, and it wouldn't be cut any short. but eventually he would head back to class, and they would announce that something is going to happen, something is going on, and that is the Class 1A versus Class 1B. Of course, Izuku is kind of psyched to hear this. It's going to be really interesting. Class 1A versus Class 1B. But just as he heads over, Izuku's not going to be participating. Aizawa stops him and says that there's something else for him to do. Izuku has gone beyond what most pro heroes are even at this moment, but there is somebody that Aizawa wants him to test, somebody that he wants on board. And once they're on board, and once Izuku is able to evaluate him, he might be able to join Class 1A, or maybe Class 1B. They're not so sure yet, but that's what Izuku's job is, to evaluate this new potential student. Okay. Who do you want me to evaluate? And isn't that a teacher's job? Don't play with me, kid. Just do what I ask, okay? Go to the gym over there. It'll be alright. There's another teacher waiting for you. Izuku heads over, and when he arrives, he's greeted by President Mike, and President Mike tells him that the other student is waiting in there. Izuku walks in, and the big three is there as well, watching what's going on, and Izuku looks toward the student they're talking about, Hitoshi Shinso, the one that's, Izuku promised to train and get stronger. Izuku smiles and slams his fist into his hand and says that if he's ready to join the hero course, he'll definitely get him right. He'll definitely get him in shape and get him ready. Shinso smiles and says that their little fight won't be as easy as it was back then. Izuku shrugs and says that he disagrees, that Shinso may have gotten stronger, but there are levels to this. But he'll make sure that Shinso is far, far stronger than any of these other students that he's currently, intertwined with. Izuku smiles and gets ready for combat, and their training will finally begin. Izuku's road to being the #1 hero is clear, but how will he affect everybody else around him? And how has he affected everyone else around him? His job now is to get Shinso in the right, basically, stratosphere and being strong enough to join Class 1A or Class 1B. And that's exactly what he's going to do. Teach him flawless technique, teach him martial arts, and various things to come. But that is a story for another day. And this is the end of the story of What If Deku Was a Quirkless Prodigy. If you all enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, a sub, and a comment down below, all that good stuff. It just progressively got extremely overpowered. I mean, I feel like there was no denying that. Nonetheless, I hope y'all enjoyed. And for those who are asking about the whole Nejire ship, I don't normally do ships. I kind of just leave it up for interpretation. I mean, there's some time frames where we won't talk about that may or may not deal with them being together or not being together. So if you guys like the idea of them being together, sure. If you don't, then that's good as well. Nonetheless, I hope y'all enjoyed, and I hope all of y'all have an amazing day. Later.